My family does not invite me but invites his ex. Help. It was a crisp morning when I sat down, fingers trembling over my phone's keyboard, composing yet another attempt to seek solace from strangers on the internet. My partner and I, both in our late 30s, had been together for 2 years. It felt like destiny when we met, both weary from past relationships but still hopeful for a future. We'd grown so close, dreaming of starting a family and spending our lives together. Yet, a shadow loomed over us, an unrelenting reminder of a chapter my partner had long since closed. That shadow had a name: his ex. He'd left her months before we met, a decision he made because he no longer loved her. A clear, definitive end. But endings, as I've come to learn, are not always mutual. For her, the story hadn't concluded, it had merely transformed into a desperate act of clinging, weaving herself into every corner of his life she could still touch. Her presence had become a constant, invasive, unbearable weight in our relationship. It wasn't as though their breakup was recent. Their relationship had spanned 12 years, and I could understand how bonds had formed between her and his family during that time. People grow attached. They share laughter, memories, even tears. I didn't expect those ties to vanish overnight, but what I couldn't fathom was how she had grown even closer to his family after we started dating, especially when she'd previously shown little interest in maintaining those connections. The change had been stark, almost as though she saw my arrival as a threat. Where once she'd been distant, she was now ever present. She began ringing him incessantly, her calls ranging from trivial to dramatic. He ignored her, blocked her. Yet she found other avenues, turning her attention to his family instead. And they welcomed her in, almost unquestioningly. My mind reeled as I watched her sidestep every boundary we tried to put in place. The worst were the little jabs she made, subtle enough to avoid outright confrontation but sharp enough to pierce me. She posted throwback photos of his mother, positioning herself as an enduring part of their family. She crafted public declarations of love for his sisters and sisters-in-law, referring to them as hers in a possessive, almost territorial manner. It wasn't just words, it was an outright declaration of dominance, a reminder that no matter what I did, she'd always be there. Her posts screamed a simple, chilling message: "You might be with him now, but I was here first." The sense of exclusion was relentless. When his sisters planned a girls' night out or a holiday, there she was, center stage, radiating a confidence born from years of familiarity. Meanwhile, I stood on the sidelines, uninvited, invisible. The sting of rejection burned deeper with each event I missed. They'd never had children or married, which should have made it easier to part ways, yet somehow, she remained entwined with his family as if by an invisible thread I couldn't sever. Her words were cruel, but her actions were crueler. It was more than her presence, it was the way she wielded it like a weapon, ensuring that no matter how hard I tried to establish my place in his life, she would overshadow me. My partner did his best to shield me, yet there was only so much he could do. He'd made it clear to her that their relationship was over, that she needed to move on. Still, she persisted, and his family seemed blind to the damage she was causing. Each time I tried to express my feelings, I was met with dismissive reassurances. "She's just part of the family," they'd say, as though that explained everything. But how could someone who wasn't even married into the family still hold such power? How could they not see how her presence drove a wedge between us? The frustration boiled inside me, spilling into sleepless nights and tearful conversations. I began to wonder if I was being unreasonable, but deep down, I knew my feelings were valid. It wasn't just about her. It was about the doors that remained closed to me, the way I was left on the periphery while she occupied the seat I should have been given. The weight of her shadow was suffocating, and no matter how much my partner tried to reassure me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I would never truly belong as long as she was there. I was fighting not just for his love, which I knew I had, but for a place in the family he so deeply cared for. And the battle was tearing me apart. 2 months ago, the invitation had arrived with a casual air, A simple text from his sister-in-law inviting both of us to a party. My partner was excited an evening together with his family, a chance for me to strengthen the fragile, tentative bonds I'd been trying so desperately to forge. But as the date loomed closer, the storm clouds of doubt began to gather in my mind. "Do you think she'll be there?" I asked, the question heavy with dread. It wasn't even necessary to specify who I meant. The ghost of his ex loomed over every conversation about his family. My partner's face tightened as he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "She probably will," he admitted. "And honestly, I'm worried she might try something. She's unpredictable, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." His concern was genuine, but it only made the situation more painful. "Shouldn't this be a safe space for us? For me?" "Maybe you should talk to her," I suggested hesitantly, though I hated the idea of her having any more attention. "Let her know that we're coming and that this is supposed to be a good time for everyone, not a chance for drama." He hesitated, clearly reluctant. "I can try," he conceded, though his expression made it clear he didn't relish the idea. A few hours later, I watched as he dialed her number, his tone neutral but firm as he broached the subject. What followed was the sound of venomous entitlement spilling from her lips. "She said you shouldn't come," he relayed to me afterward, his voice tinged with frustration. "She said this is her family, that she's known them for over a decade, and that she doesn't want you there." I felt the words like a punch to the stomach. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She was staking her claim so blatantly, so unapologetically. "And what did you say to that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I told her it's not up to her," he replied firmly. "That this is my family too, and she doesn't get to dictate who's invited." His words were comforting, but I could still feel the icy grip of exclusion tightening around me. In the end, the decision to stay home wasn't one we made lightly. "I don't want to go if it's going to be tense," I told him. "I'd rather not ruin the evening for everyone or give her the satisfaction of causing a scene." He agreed, and we spent the night together, just the two of us, trying to make the best of it. But as we laughed over a shared bottle of wine, I couldn't shake the nagging thought of what might be happening in our absence. The next morning, my fears were confirmed. My phone buzzed with notifications, pictures of the party flooding social media. And there she was, front and center in every shot, her presence unmistakable. She was seated with his family, laughing as if she hadn't spent the week before trying to exclude me. She was at the top table, a queen holding court, while I sat on the sidelines. My partner was furious when I showed him. "I told her not to come. I told them this wasn't okay," he exclaimed, pacing the room. His anger was a balm to my wounded heart, proof that he was on my side. But it didn't erase the sting of seeing her there, nor the realization that his family had ignored his wishes. Determined to draw a line in the sand, he called her again. This time, there was no tiptoeing around the issue. "You need to back off," he told her, his voice steel-edged with frustration. "This isn't your family anymore. You need to let go and stop trying to cause problems." Her response was as predictable as it was infuriating. Later that evening, I received a message from her, an open declaration of war. "I'll always be here," she wrote. "I'll always be number one." The audacity of it left me shaking. How could someone cling so tightly to a relationship that no longer existed? Something inside me snapped. 2 years of biting my tongue, of enduring her jabs and her presence, of watching her worm her way into spaces meant for me. I couldn't take it anymore. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I typed out a response, the words sharp and cutting. I told her she was pathetic, desperate, clinging to a life that had moved on without her. It wasn't my finest moment, but it felt good to release some of the anger I'd been holding back. For a moment, the silence after I hit send felt like triumph. But as the adrenaline wore off, it was replaced by a sinking feeling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And the battle lines had been drawn even more clearly. 3 days ago, My phone buzzed with a message from my sister-in-law. It was an unexpected gesture, one that carried a flicker of hope. She suggested a night out, just us girls, and for a moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. I responded eagerly, expressing my excitement and asking for the details. But as the hours turned into days, the follow-up message I was waiting for never came. By the time the evening rolled around, I realized with a sinking heart that the invitation wasn't going to materialize. Curiosity and a gnawing sense of dread compelled me to check social media. There it was, the ex, arm in arm with his sisters and sister-in-law, smiling as though she belonged. The sight made my stomach twist in familiar knots. Once again, I had been sidelined, left to watch from the outside as she claimed the place I was struggling so desperately to occupy. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just her doing. His family had chosen to keep her close, even after he had made it clear that he wanted to move forward. I felt the sting of betrayal deep in my chest, not just from her constant interference but from their silent complicity. How could they ignore his wishes? How could they not see how hurtful this was? How isolating? I had spent 2 long years trying to rise above this situation, convincing myself that if I just gave it time, things would fall into place. But the more time passed, the more entrenched she became, and the harder it was to ignore the cracks forming in my resolve. My partner had done everything he could. He had set boundaries, spoken to his family, even confronted her directly. But there were limits to what he could do. She wasn't his to control, and his family's unwillingness to let go was something even he couldn't fix. The pain wasn't just about her, it was about the doors that remained firmly shut to me. How was I supposed to build a relationship with his family when she occupied the pedestal they refused to take her down from? The thought of trying to navigate their gatherings, of sitting at the same table while she basked in their attention, made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't just awkward, it was unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I would never measure up to her in their eyes. Part of me wanted to believe there was some logic to their attachment. After all, she had been a part of their lives for over a decade. They had shared holidays, milestones, and even tragedy together. The stillbirth she and my partner had endured 8 years ago was a pain that bound her to them in a way I could never replicate. She often invoked it as a justification for her continued presence, reminding me and likely them that she had suffered alongside them. But while I could understand their sympathy, it was impossible to ignore how she exploited it. She wielded their shared grief like a shield, deflecting any suggestion that it was time to move on. I had my own loss to bear, twins, gone too soon, but I didn't cling to my ex's family for comfort. I had learned to grieve privately, to find my strength in myself. Watching her turn her pain into an anchor that kept her tethered to my partner's family made me feel bitter and resentful, though I hated admitting it even to myself. I voiced my frustrations to his sister, trying to gauge her perspective. Maybe I'm just overthinking things, I said hesitantly. Maybe I'm imagining the digs she's making at me. Her response was a bitter validation of my fears. No, you're not imagining it, she admitted. We've all seen it. We know what she's like. If they knew, then why? Why did they still let her overshadow me? Why did they continue to allow her to hurt me, even when they could see the damage she was doing? That one admission haunted me, twisting like a knife in my gut. They knew. They saw. And still, they did nothing. I couldn't help but fixate on the differences between us. She was 10 years older than me, well past the age where she could have children. I had always assumed that my ability to give my partner the family he so desperately wanted would have been a source of joy for his family, something they would celebrate and embrace. Instead, they clung to her as though letting her go would somehow diminish the love they once had for her. Each time I brought up my feelings, my partner tried his best to comfort me. It's not about you, he'd say. This is just how they are. It doesn't mean they don't care about you. But the words felt hollow, their reassurance dulled by the reality I faced time and time again. Actions spoke louder than words, and their actions told me I would never truly belong. I didn't know how much longer I could endure this. I loved him with every fiber of my being, and I trusted him implicitly. But love wasn't a shield against the pain his family was causing me. Their refusal to respect his wishes, to even acknowledge my place in his life, felt like a constant rejection not just of me, but of us. I was running out of strength, and the more I tried to push through, the heavier the weight became. I couldn't shake the sense that I was fighting a losing battle, and the question loomed larger with each passing day. How long could I keep fighting before the cracks in my resolve became too wide to mend? The final straw came just a few hours ago. I was casually scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing in my mind. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a moment of peace after days of emotional turmoil. But peace was elusive, and as I scrolled, my thumb froze. There it was, a new post from her. For a moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought I had blocked her, had taken every precaution to shield myself from her antics. But I had only blocked her messages and calls, not her profile. She had found a way to reach me again, to ensure I saw exactly what she wanted me to see. The post was a gallery of photos from the night before. She was with his sisters and sister-in-law, laughing, posing, their arms slung around each other like they were the best of friends. There were pictures of them entering his sister's house, the caption filled with excitement about how they couldn't wait for their next night out. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with every swipe. This was the night I had been invited to join them. The night I had been hopeful about, only to be left without a follow-up message. I hadn't heard a word, but she was there, front and center, claiming the space that should have been mine. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She had blocked me after our last confrontation, only to unblock me just so I could see this. It was calculated, cruel, and painfully effective. She wanted me to know that she was still in their lives, still a priority, still winning. And in that moment, I felt the sharp, undeniable sting of defeat. My mind raced with all the ways I had tried to rationalize her behavior, to make sense of why his family continued to embrace her despite everything. I thought about the stillborn child they had lost 8 years ago, a tragedy that had undoubtedly bonded her to them. She had used that bond as a shield, a justification for her presence, a way to elicit sympathy and keep herself tethered to their lives. I knew grief was complicated, messy, and deeply personal. I had endured my own heartbreak with my twins, and while I would never diminish the pain of loss, I couldn't help but feel she was exploiting it. Where I had turned inward to heal, she had turned outward, using the tragedy as a bridge to maintain her place in their world. It wasn't just about grief anymore, it was a weapon she wielded with precision, keeping her connected to a family that no longer had a reason to hold on to her. And then there were the photos. Photos of my partner still hanging on her walls, like relics of a life she refused to let go of. I knew my partner had done everything he could to make his stance clear. He hadn't reached out to her since their breakup, had avoided her calls, and had only ever confronted her at my urging. I trusted him implicitly. But his unwavering commitment to me didn't erase the weight of her presence, nor did it mend the cracks her interference had created in my relationship with his family. I felt raw, exposed, and utterly disrespected. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about his family's choice to continue entertaining her, to prioritize her over me despite everything they knew. They knew how much this hurt me. They knew how much it hurt him. And yet, they allowed her to stay, to dominate, to overshadow me at every turn. The emotions churned inside me: anger, sadness, frustration, and a deep sense of loss. I wasn't just losing a fight against her, I was losing the hope I had for a future with his family. How could I build relationships with people who continually disregarded me? How could I ever feel at home in a family that made me feel like an outsider? That night, I sat down with my partner, the weight of it all too heavy to carry alone. I poured out everything: the post, the hurt, the feeling of being pushed aside. He listened, his face darkening with anger and frustration as I spoke. "This isn't fair to you," he said, his voice firm. It's not fair to us. But fairness felt like a distant dream. I knew he supported me, that he was on my side, but the battle was no longer just between us and her. It was with his family, with the unspoken loyalty they continued to show her despite the damage it caused. In that moment, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I loved him deeply, more than I could put into words, but love alone wasn't enough to erase the pain of being perpetually sidelined. Something had to change, or the cracks that had formed would grow too wide to bridge. I need to know, I said quietly, my voice trembling. I need to know if they'll ever choose me. Because if they don't, I don't know how I can keep doing this. He reached for my hand, his grip firm and steady. Then we'll make them choose, he said, his voice resolute. Because this isn't just about you or me, it's about us. And I'm not letting anyone come between us, not even them. It was a promise, a lifeline in the storm. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the uncertainty that lingered. Love was strong, but was it strong enough to weather the ties that bound her to his family? Only time would tell. And as much as I wanted to believe in a future where we came out on the other side, united and whole, I couldn't help but wonder if this fight would ever truly end.